So we're going to look at the disassembly of this cloned ETA-based movement based on the 7750. This is the Burgeon 7750 movement holder that I use. And looking at the dial side, I've removed the dial. You'll notice that there is a spacer, a dial spacer, that I'll remove first. So there's the dial spacer taken out. And now looking at the dial down side, first thing I'm going to do is remove the balance wheel, the balance assembly. So it's held in place by one screw. And you'll notice the blued screws on this imitation movement as well. And I'll just carefully remove the balance cock. Sometimes you need to prise it up a little bit with a screwdriver in the slot provided. Just be careful not to move it too much so you don't want to break the pivot, the staff, balance staff. And this watch was presented to me not functioning. So the first thing I was doing here was using an old oiler to move the pallets back and forth. The watch does have some wind on the mainspring, and I noticed that the escapement was not operational. Here you can see where the day indicator would have been located. And now I'm showing how the quickset date function works. And when I rotate the crown in this direction here, you'll notice the double corrector, that's this part right here. When I turn the crown, the double corrector moves into position and would have interacted with the day indicator to set the day of the week. When I move the crown in the other direction, the double corrector now interacts with the date indicator, and that's how the date setting works. There's an interesting difference between the clone movement and the Swiss movement. In the Swiss movement, the ETA manual indicates that you should not set the date between certain times, like between 10 p.m. and maybe 2 a.m. What I'm doing now is moving the date indicator driving wheel. That's this brass wheel here, and that is what in the normal usage will turn the date over. And I'm advancing it until this little beak is just about to hit the date indicator, and I really should have continued to advance this until this little dog that's on the driving wheel, this piece right here, until that was about to interact with the beak, but I made a mistake here, but trust me, it works the same. Now when I set the date with the double corrector, you'll notice that the next tooth is about to hit this beak, and on the Swiss movement that's a solid piece, and right here in the clone movement, it just pushes it out of the way. On the Swiss movement, it actually would have broken that off. It's a one-piece date driving wheel. The clone movement has this as two pieces, one with that little dog and one with the beak on it. And that's an interesting improvement, I believe, that the Swiss should take note of. So now this is the corrector cover plate that I'm removing here as we disassemble the calendar mechanism. I'll just remove the one screw, and this cover plate comes right off, and then I can remove the double corrector as well. So here's the cover plate, and I'll remove the double corrector. I'm a little bit of a hard time grabbing it for some reason, but there it is. Now underneath that double corrector you can actually see the intermediate setting wheel, which cannot be removed just yet. That is this part right here. It can't be removed because it's actually held in place by the setting lever spring. Now I'm going to remove the date jumper cover plate by removing these two screws here And a date jumper is the spring that holds the date into place and kind of pops it into its next position. So here I'll remove the cover plate, and here we can see the date jumper and the date jumper spring. So before we do anything else, I should be able to remove the date indicator wheel, get that out of the way. That's what I'm doing here. Careful not to scratch it or mar it in any way. And now I'm going to remove the date jumper. And again, on a typical 7750, you would also have a day jumper as well. Now I'm removing the date jumper spring. And on a typical 7750, this spring would be shaped slightly differently and would serve as both the day and the date jumper spring. And I now switch my camera into manual focus mode. I think that'll do better for us. Now preparing to remove the calendar platform, which is secured by 3 screws. So we'll just remove those screws. This will allow us to remove the entire calendar platform, which is one assembly. One more screw in there. Sometimes these screws are pretty difficult to remove. You can always use a bit of one touch to remove it. And before I remove the calendar platform, I decided to remove the screw that fastens the date indicator driving wheel in place and remove the top portion. Now, I cannot remove the lower portion of the date indicator driving wheel just yet. So first, let's remove that calendar platform. Gently prise it up with a screwdriver. There are a couple slots that you can use for that purpose, and away it comes. And sorry for I moved the camera accidentally, but there's the lower portion of the date indicator driving wheel. Now, then I'll take out the hour wheel, and the free cannon pinion is also embedded here. So I'm just going to separate those two parts. The 7750 platform does not have a friction fit cannon pinion. Function is provided by another driving pinion that we'll see shortly. So this wheel here is part of the running seconds hand at the 6 o'clock position, which is different than the 7750 platform. I'm just removing the intermediate date driving wheel right now. And again, this wheel here is part of a modification that allows you to have a running seconds indicator instead of an hour counter. This is the minute wheel. Whoops. Careful, little slippery sucker. Now I move on to the keyless work here, and I should have removed the driving pinion. We'll come back to that later. A bit of an error. Now I'm removing the screws that secure the setting spring. And what I like to do is I loosen the screws and then I remove the tension off of the setting spring so it doesn't pop away. And there's the second screw, and now we can lift off the setting spring. And again, with it is coming this intermediate setting wheel. There's the setting wheel, intermediate setting wheel. Another intermediate setting wheel. Now, I made another bit of a mistake here. I started disassembling the keyless work without taking the power off of the mainspring. Not a good idea. So I'm going to quickly place the setting lever, the setting spring back in place so that I can use the keyless work to use the crown to let the power down in the mainspring. Not a mistake that you want to make trying to, forgetting to let the power down. So I've returned the watch back over. And now I remove the clutch spring. And this is part of the automatic device bridge assembly here. So I'm going to remove the automatic device bridge, which is secured by 3 blue screws. And before I do that, I need to take the tension off of the hammer spring. So you saw me just release the hammer spring there. And then the hammer spring can kind of be rocked out of place. And I'm now removing the tension on the reversing gear. There's a tiny little spring in there that you just saw me taking the tension off and letting it back with the crown so that things don't pop out of place when I remove the automatic device bridge. Again, 3 blue screws will make the automatic device bridge available for removal. And this third screw is a little bit tricky to get out for some reason, so I just left it in place. Oh, there. Now it popped up. And pop back down. I'll just take it away with the automatic device bridge and remove it afterwards. And you may have noticed as I'm removing this, some of the parts, the reversing gear and the reduction gear, kind of came away with the device bridge, so I put them back. I'm just doing this to show you where they go, but I did place that reversing gear, the reversing wheel, upside down. So that's that. Got to keep that in mind. This is the clutch, and the clutch is what swings the oscillating pinion into place to drive the chronograph seconds mechanism. Remove the clutch. And now I'll remove the oscillating pinion, which is a very delicate little part. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to remove the hammer. Hammer is used to reset the chronograph hands to their 0 position. And this is the oscillating pinion here. Remove the oscillating pinion. Again, sorry about the camera angle there. And I also removed the chronograph seconds wheel. You may notice it's not there anymore in the center of the picture. And this part is a friction spring, which has some plastic, a plastic component, and a plastic and metal. You have to be careful not to put that in the ultrasonic cleaner. This is the minute recording wheel, part of the chronograph mechanism that comes away. Just looking at the other parts here. And I'm basically now letting the power down on the watch by holding the click spring, which is at the lower portion under my blurred fingers that you can't see, but I'm holding the click spring out of place and gently letting the power down with the crown. There's the click spring here. I just realized that it wasn't in view, so I'm showing you that click spring right here. I'm showing you here is that some of these screws are actually not screws, they're eccentrics. And you have to be very careful not to try to remove those eccentrics because you could throw the whole chronograph mechanism out of alignment. And this is the operating lever. Removing the operating lever. which is the start-stop for the chronograph function. Large shouldered screw here, and then the operating lever comes away. This allows us to remove the operating lever spring. I do this on a piece of pith wood, and there's the spring at the top on my tweezers. Just grab that and slide it out gently. And you should make note of the orientation of this spring, because it is an odd-shaped spring, and you should understand how it's supposed to go back into the watch. And actually what I'm doing here is I'm placing the spring next to the movement, and I took a still photo of it so that I would remember the orientation. Now getting prepared to remove the chronograph bridge by removing these blue screws. And again, finding a carefully locating a place where we can, use a screwdriver to prise this up. You have to be very careful when removing these bridges. If you need to kind of pry them out, you want to make sure that you're not doing it in a place that's going to cause damage. There goes the chronograph bridge. And next we'll remove the ratchet wheel driving wheel. Now you have a better view of the click spring where it interacts with the ratchet wheel. This is the lock mechanism. And it's held in place with one blue screw. Again, this is pretty different in the clone versus the Swiss movement. There would have been some other parts under here. And this wheel here, for example, is fixed in place with a bit of a bushing that's pressed upon a post. So I'm not going to mess around with that. I don't want to remove that. Next, I'm going to remove the cam jumper. And this is a pretty stiff spring. So you need a pretty good set of tweezers. Apply a reasonable amount of force to that to release the tension. And then you can kind of rock it out of place. There you go. Rotates, and then you can lift it away. Takes a bit of practice. Next, we remove the detente. Basically, this is used to transfer some of the mechanical changes in the chronograph mechanism from the one side of the watch to the other side of the watch. Next, we can remove the cam. Move the cam retaining screw. The cam is one large assembled piece that is not disassemblable. Just comes away. Remove the ratchet wheel. One retaining screw. Then we lift the ratchet wheel out of place. And I'm just going to use a pegwood to hold the click spring out of the way so that I can get hold of that ratchet wheel. Now to remove the crown wheel, there are two screws that secure the crown wheel core in place. So we're going to remove those two screws. And then lift away the crown wheel core. And the crown wheel seems to want to come with it. So just hold it down with some pegwood. There's the core. And there's the crown wheel. Parts often adhere to each other because there's some old oil in there. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm putting everything back together because I really wanted to check the escapement after I removed all the chronograph mechanism just to see if the watch runs. So everything goes back in real quick because I want to see if that balance wheel is going to function when I've removed all of the motion work and the chronograph mechanism, put a little bit of wind on the watch, and look at that, it actually is operational. And that tells me that it could have been a piece of dirt or something in the chronograph mechanism that was causing the watch not to operate properly. But that's good news. And now I take everything back apart again. And what I'm really trying to say to you is it's been quite some time since I've sat down and worked on a watch, so I'm making some rookie mistakes here. I'm now looking to remove the barrel bridge, which is secured in place with 3 screws. And I can't get this guy out, so I'm going to use some one-touch because you don't really want to mar that screw, so I use a little bit of one-touch to bring it out. Another mistake I made here, a little bit of an oversight, is when I removed this barrel bridge, which is what I'm doing now, there's a balance hack in this watch. And that balance hack was actually still attached to the balance bridge, the barrel bridge, apologies. And I didn't notice it. So, as careful as you are, you need to be to think about these things and check each part as you remove it. Now, what's happening here is this second wheel, I can't remove it. And why can't I remove it? Because I forgot to remove the driving pinion on the other side of the watch. So there's the third wheel. And interestingly enough, the fourth wheel doesn't come out either. And we'll talk about that in a moment, but I can remove the escape wheel. And let's see if I can get the... And this is atypical on this movement. Normally you would be able to remove the fourth wheel, but not that second wheel. So I'm going to remove the barrel bridge. I'm sorry, the barrel, the mainspring barrel, because that can slide out. I'm going to turn the watch back over. And remember we talked about that driving pinion, which is press fit into place. That's this part right here. And I'm going to use some hand levers to gently prise that away. It's press fit onto that second wheel. And there's even some indents in the plate to allow you to get your tools in place here to remove this wheel. You just have to gently prise it up evenly. You don't want to bend the staff, the pivot. And there it goes. And again, one of the differences between the clone and the Swiss movement is the mechanism for this second feature at the 6 o'clock position. So there's a second gear that is press fit onto the bottom of the fourth wheel. And that is this wheel here. And I'm using some collet tools to remove that. Again, very carefully so we don't bend it. So once that's out of the way, the second wheel, not the seconds wheel, the second wheel and the fourth wheel would fall in a way and I could remove them. And now I'm going back and disassembling the keyless work by removing the setting lever spring. And remember, I just take some, loosen the screws a bit, and then I took some tension off the spring. And then took the screws all the way out and remove the setting lever spring. Now I can remove, let's see, a couple parts here. This is the yoke that I can remove. And now, okay, before I remove the yoke, I decide to remove this rocking bar. So the rocking bar, just take some tension off the spring, and then it comes off of its post. Now I can take some tension off of the spring here that's holding the yoke in place, and simply remove the yoke. Okay, now remove the setting lever. And if I pull the stem out, I can remove the sliding pinion, and I can remove the setting pinion which will complete the disassembly of this 7750 clone.